What's up, everybody? How are you doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing great. I'm really, really excited to share today a bunch of sound design stuff. We got some great questions that have been handed in. I'm going to do my best to get to all of the questions. There's a lot of really, really good ones. But before I do that, I really quickly want to talk about some cool stuff that I learned about sound design recently that I'm just geeking the hell out on, and it is so awesome. Okay, so this is my course. This is like one of the classes. And last week we were talking about the fundamentals of sound physics and everything. And, I made a bunch of cool artwork and stuff for it from the Akira movie. And there's a bunch of stuff about like waves and how they work and everything. And, fast Fourier analysis, composition, decomposition, damping, refraction, reflection, the harmonic series, all kinds of stuff. And then we got to a section about the fundamentals of digital audio, where I taught people about aliasing and sample rate and all the usual suspects. But there's something that a lot of people don't appreciate, and that is that the sound range above the frequencies that you can hear is not just useful for avoiding aliasing, it's really useful for sound design. And one of the coolest things you can do for sound design is to explore this range, which is known as the hypersonic range. If you ask, just a second, the people who made Akira, and the soundtrack are a really cool crew called Genio Yamashiragumi, and they've been active since the 70s, and it's a crew of over 100 scientists and writers and academics. And Tsutomu Ohashi is basically the head of it, but it's like not that hierarchical. But anyway, he's the most well-known member, and he did a bunch of research that you can check out on the yamashirogumi.jp website about the hypersonic effect. And they measured the brain, and they found out that these frequencies, which are above the range of human hearing normally, like 16,000 cycles per second and higher than 20,000, these frequencies are very present in the natural environment, but they are not present in music. And at least most of the time, they're not present in music because of the the frequency spectrum of the instruments. And the people who made Akira, the Yamashirogumi crew, they're really into gamelan and tropical rainforest. You can see the frequency profiles here. The gamelan is a metallophone. It's a metal instrument that you play with mallets, and it goes very, very high up into the frequency spectrum, and its spectrum is somewhat more like a tropical rainforest environment, with all of these different animal calls and water noises and stuff existing up in that hypersonic range. And when you hook people's brains up and measure the hypersonic range, it does have a measurable effect. And if you look up the hypersonic effect, that's Dr. Ohashi's book. Here, I'm trying to get it in English. I can't find it in English. I have to get it translated by Google Translate, but I'm dying to read the full book. But if you look up the hypersonic effect, the same name, you can get all these different documents that have all of the research, and it's actually like really groundbreaking research that we can subconsciously perceive the range well above what is typically considered the upper limit of human hearing. And there's some further research in Virginia that found out that you hear those frequencies not just with your ears, but with your cells, and it has metabolic effects on your cells, and that you take in some of these ultrasonic frequencies with your eyeballs. Not just your ears, but your actual eyeballs take that in and transmit it. So I had all of my students this week in the course. Everyone was to collect a bunch of hypersonic sounds recorded at sample rates above 44.1, like 96K or higher, and to explore them. And I did a bit of that exploration here, and I think you'll be able to see to hear, even on your poopy normal internet audio connection, that there is a pretty marked difference in the way things sound. So I got this hypersonic field recording here, and this section of the field recording, here, I'll take the effects off. I had some effects on. This section of the field recording here had some really pronounced hypersonics way up top in the highs, right? So I took those same sounds, right, and I added saturator and reverb to create more brightness up top and some hypersonic reverb, right, which sounds like this, right? And then I sampled it and pitched it down 2 octaves. And you can see I sampled it at 240 BPM, and we're at 120, so this is down an octave. So this is the 192. And then this is at 44.1. See how much smaller that is? It's crazy. So here, I'm gonna turn these all up 6 dB, I guess. So the effect is only exaggerated the further you go pitching down. So this is a pitch down 44.1 resampling of that sound. Right, and then this is the full sample rate. You can see this still has 20K, even though it's been pitched down 2 octaves. Whereas this 44.1 sound, it's missing all those hypersonics, which is a dead giveaway that it's been pitched down. And when you pitch things down, that's really the key, especially pitching down something like a reverb. That's really the key to making things sound super duper big. So here, this is, I made like a hypersonic sine wave and sampled it. Here it is at 192. Here it is at 44.1. See how it's all like grainy up there? And now watch what happens when you pitch it down 2 octaves. So this is... See, this doesn't even sound like it has reverb on it. But this one does. Right? Same thing here. So even though we're well outside of the hypersonic range, you can see there's still a pretty marked difference in that feeling of dimension. Let's check out some more recordings. So this is a guitar that's now been pitched down heavily. So this is the 44.1 guitar that was processed at 44.1. Actually, again, I'm going to just turn these up, maybe 6. So this is 44.1. And then this is at 192 pitched down. Sounds huge. Its subs are still smooth. Stereo image is still big. But it just sounds all magic and slow. Like, compare that to this total loss of fidelity. Like, this is all boxy. So even over the internet, you can probably hear that there is a difference. Now, I don't recommend cranking your sound card up to 192 all the time, but for doing sound design sessions, one of the big hacks for getting that like huge sounding Hans Zimmer like oh my god effect is pitching down hypersound. And actually, I'm just going to show you here quickly. I've got a few more of these hypersonic sounds that are just from the internet. I'll see if I can find one that has nice bright highs. Oh yeah, there we go. Yeah, see, pitch that rain down. See, it still sounds pretty good, even 2 octaves down. Or like this tie instrument. Just listen to it normally. Now pitch down 2 octaves. What in the Amon Tobin is that? That's how you get that stuff. 2 octaves now. Right? Like those are crazy. And then even just random like that's just an impulse response clap kind of thing. Even that sounds like a gunshot. But that's how you do a lot of the sound design for movies and stuff. They record things at a really high sample rate and then pitch those samples down. So that's your tip for the day. Explore the hypersonic realm and start pitching your samples down more, because that's how you get that sound that's like big and huge and cinematic and massive, is if you pump up the hypersonic range and give it a lot of reverb and then pitch it down 2 octaves. And as long as you're working 2 sample rates higher than what you want, so if you want to pitch it down 1 octave, double your sample rate. If you want to pitch it down 2 octaves, quadruple your sample rate. And if you make the sound at that crazy resolution, even when you're at 44.1 or whatever and you're working with it, you still get that huge, creamy, like big sound. And all the slowed down sounds aren't all jittery. All your time stretches come out better. And you just like, I mean, you could hear even in just that example, you can hear even, you're listening to an MP3 in this MP4 file, but I was going to do a blind test, but I was like, everyone's going to be able to tell. What's the point of even doing a blind test? All right, cool. So if you want to join the Akira themed sound design course that's going on now, I would highly recommend it. It is super duper fun, and we're exploring all kinds of different stuff. So check out the link in the description. I've just posted it in the chat. I don't know if it'll let me, but it's in the video description. Yeah, there it is. It went in the chat. But yeah, and this works when you can do this hypersonic stuff with anything. You just have to sample it at the super high sample rate before you pitch it down. But you can do them in the box too. But I really recommend, get out there, make some hypersonic recordings of some kind, whether they're in your studio or whether they're out in the world. Then yeah, you can start recording, because commercial sounds, a lot of the time they've had all this stuff done to them, and by the time you get them in the sound pack, they don't have the hypersonic highs anymore, because the conventional wisdom is that 44.1 is plenty and that you're not losing quality. But as you saw in those shootouts, there's definitely quality lost. But yeah, so check it out. Check out the hypersonic effect. Check out Yamashiro Gumi, the Genio Yamashiro Gumi crew. They made the Akira score. Check out the new double album they just dropped. Double album. 2 different producers remixed the whole Akira score. So it's a double CD that just came out. So yeah, very, very cool. All right, so I'm going to go get to some of your questions now. So this is from Ken. I heard a critical part of having your own sound is sound design. This is true. Versus using native plugins on whatever DAW is being used. I don't understand what that question is. I heard the critical part of having your own sound is sound design versus using native plugins on whatever DAW is being used. I think sound design versus native plugins doesn't make sense as a question, because the native plugins of your DAW are probably the thing you're going to be using the most when you do your own sound design. So I really recommend that people get in the habit of not reaching for third-party plugins. Like, try to work with just the stock plugins of your DAW, because you can do incredible high fidelity, expressive work with just the plugins that are already in your DAW. And basically all of the sound packs are you just paying someone else to use the same synthesizers that you have. Basically, you're being like, I need an adult, use these synthesizers for me. is basically what you're doing when you buy sound packs. And then when you buy plugins, most of the time, what the plugin does, you could recreate using just the stock devices of your DAW if you studied and knew what they were doing. So, you know, I own a ton of outboard hardware. You sometimes see me in the other studio upstairs, but in here in my track finishing room, it's just all in the box except for my Ableton push, you know, and it's just really treated room. And I use the stock plugins. You know, I study all these different pieces of hardware, but then I figure out how to do that in the DAW with just the stock plugins, because then you can open your project years later, nothing will crash, nothing is going to go out of date or whatever, and it's the best. You know, all stock is the way. Okay, so Tyson says, I think for me it's mixing. The EDM sounds have gotten so loud and great sounding that even if I found a sound I like, I'm not sure it could work in a track in these modern times. Old indie rock or contemporary classical music, no problem. Modern EDM seems like a whole different game, and that's the sound field I'd like to play in. Okay, Tyson, you need to watch my video on YouTube, the 80/20 of mixing, or check out any of the videos that I've made about clipping. The clipping is the secret to that style of loudness. And contrary to everything that was conventional until about 5 years ago, hard digital clipping is actually a cleaner way to remove peaks of volume on things like drums or guitars, anything that has like a spiky transient. That's what those initial peaks of volume are called. But hard digital clipping is the key to that. So look up clipping, and Clip 20 is a long, very, very long series about clipping done by one of our dojo members named Baphometrix, Baphometrix. She took what she learned in the dojo and expanded upon it and made this like insanely in-depth video series about how to mix using clippers. But a lot of modern mixing is really all about managing the gain staging with clipping. But then when you're doing like a sound like a vocal or a sub where the clipping will be obvious, then you want to use like a limiter or, you know, compression to manage that. But anything transient-y with lots of spikes of volume, use a clipper. And that's really the key. That's the key. So look up the clip to zero strategy, and I explain it in my 80/20 of mixing. And if you want more detail, the clip to zero strategy is the biz. Okay, okay, Michael's got 4 questions. Okay. Michael, question number 1, what's the best process for taking a sound generated through wavetable synthesis with all its processing bells and whistles and bouncing it to audio for easier manipulation and conserving CPU power? Most of the time people will just sample it down to another track and then, you know, use that. I would recommend turning your sample rate all the way up and then making that sample. But yeah, you can just take another channel, record from the first channel, and record it in. I have another method I sometimes use, and that is to use like a looper. So here, I'll just get like the Ableton piano out here. And then I will show you how to record with a looper, because this is a cool thing to know. All right, so let's go back over here. Okay, so you should see my Ableton. And now I'm just going to play the piano on the QWERTY keys here. Okay. Okay, so now if I take the looper, right, and I put the looper here, even with transport stopped, right, watch this. If I hit the record, and then hit stop, and then drag me. And then look at that. There's our piano. And then you can just go back to your looper, hit clear, and then do it again. Stop, stop, drag, boop. There you go. So that's another way that lots of people are sleeping on, and I really like to use that method as well as recording from one channel to another. Just be mindful that whatever your sample rate is set to, see I have my sample rate 88.2 right now because that's double 44.1. 44.1, love it or hate it, is the current. This is what they accept at distributors. So now I'm going to right click, show in Finder. And in Finder here, I can right click on the sample and go to info, and I'll see that, oh, does it have the stats of the wave? It does not, strangely enough. Okay. Anyway, if it did, you'd see that it was 88.2. Maybe I can open it with Audacity and see. Anyway, I don't want to get hung up on this, but yeah, that would be 88.2 because that was what my sound card was set to when I recorded. Okay, next question. Is it better to start off with a bass wavetable synth with no effects and then do the effects positioning in Ableton's audio chain, i.e. OTT filtering, LFO, etc.? I would encourage you, Michael, to let go of the idea of better, because everything that can be done badly, and it can be done well. And often the very idea of doing things properly is the thing that prevents you from doing them well. There's no right or wrong way to do any of this. There's what works for you and what doesn't work for you, right? There are things you can do to improve your audio fidelity, such as, synthesizing sounds at a higher sample rate. But that's not to say that sounds that are lo-fi suck. And a lot of my favorite sounds are extremely low sample rate. And I will often intentionally degrade sounds by recording them to a cassette deck and back, or using something like a bit crusher to make them sound all broken and wrong. And in those instances, the fact that they sound all broken and wrong and processed is what I like about them. So is the high fidelity sound in that context would be incorrect for what I was going for, because I wanted it to sound broken and dirty and falling apart, right? So there's not really any way that's better. I, for one, don't like the sound of wavetable synths. I also don't like the sound of EQ and multiband processing. So I stay away from wavetable synths, I stay away from EQ, and I stay away from multiband processing, because I don't like the way they make the wave feel. But that's just me. Different people have different preferences, and I've heard people make sounds that I would consider amazing doing things in ways that I don't like to do them. So, let go of the idea of there being a correct way to do any of this, and just have fun. If you like the results, they're good. If you don't like the results, fuck it, do something else. Okay? Michael asks, how do you use Ableton stock effects, more specifically LFO, to create more interesting or complex sounds as opposed to something like Shaperbox? Well, the difference between Ableton's LFO and Shaperbox is that Ableton's LFO modulator can affect any parameter in any device that is exposed to control. Like if you can grab it with the mouse, you can map it with the Ableton LFO. Whereas the Shaperbox LFOs, they apply to one parameter at a time usually, and they only operate inside of Shaperbox. So I find myself using the Ableton modulation suite, especially the LFOs and stuff. I find myself using those a lot more, and then just modulating the heck out of the Ableton stock devices, because, we're really used to hearing like a filter get an LFO and go wub wub wub, but we're not used to hearing the room size change dynamically on a reverb, or an LFO that repitches the delays as part of the wub. So those are ways that I would use the Ableton modulator LFO as opposed to Shaperbox. And I use the Ableton, all of the modulators, especially expression control, I use all the time. Michael says, where do you see AI taking sound design? Is it viable to use these things that claim they can mimic or replicate process synth sounds with little to no user input? AI, it's definitely going to take us in a direction where we're all kind of like curators more than creators for certain types of art, namely commercial art. Like if you're working on like an ad for TV, or you're doing graphic design that's like not your own personal recreational passion art, I could see people, the standard being AI in that regard. But there's always going to be people who appreciate art that is made in certain ways, the human way without cheating and using AI. I find the process a lot more fulfilling when I'm like actually making things from scratch and I'm like into understanding the process and using my understanding of the process to make it sound cool. And AI is cool, but it's kind of like it takes the human element out of it, and it also feels like kind of feels like it's not really your music as much. And then you have to like go around justifying it to people all the time. I think as things change culturally, you won't like if you make music with AI, you won't have to spend all day every day justifying why you make music with AI. But as it currently stands, I think like the AI audio stuff that I tried was cool, but I like my results better still. Probably in a few years, I'll be able to get results that I like better out of AI, but I kind of like doing things my way. I find the sound works out better. And let go of the idea of viable. Viable is another one of those things like better. Let go of the idea of viable. If it works for you, do it. If it doesn't work for you, don't do it. It's entirely up to you. There's no right way. Fuck what anybody thinks. Okay, so I'd love to learn more about Ableton stock processes for sound design. I know you're a wizard when it comes to investing in stock. Yeah, okay. I'll show you a couple things with just Ableton stock devices. So one thing that I find that is really, really cool, I'll just get a simple effect. I'll get like an ARP loop. I think I probably have some in my library here. Okay, so let's get this ARP loop, right? And we're going to loop the loop here and listen to it. Okay, let's go back up. Okay, cool. So now this is at 120 beats per minute. I'm going to scroll down here and show you here. So let's say this is our loop and it's just looping away all day, all night. Can't stop, won't stop. Looping. And we want this loop to sound a little more interesting as it goes. Well, we're going to take a page from famed minimalist composer Steve Reich's book, and we're going to use phasing, but the good kind of phasing. We're going to use rhythmic phasing, and we're going to do that with just the good old-fashioned Ableton delay. And what I want to do is I want to make it so that there's two copies of this sound, and they're going to be slightly different lengths, right? And that's going to give us a feeling like a badly beat matched record, and it's going to sound cool. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put this all the way wet, take the feedback all the way down, and the filter off. And now I'm going to put it on 1/16th note, and I'm going to put it in a group. So now the sound is going to play with a copy of the sound 1/16th note later. Actually, I should turn that down. It's a little loud. Right? That sounds cool, but I want the timing of this second one to drift a little bit. I want it to drift from 1/16th note to 2/16th notes. So how am I going to accomplish that? Well, I'm going to select the length of time that is 1/16th note in Ableton. And if I select that length of time and look in the bottom left of my screen, there's a little message telling me that the duration of time that I've selected is 125 milliseconds. So what I want to do now is make a delay that goes from 0 milliseconds to 125 milliseconds using the time. So I'm going to macro it, and I'm going to set the maximum and minimum. So it's going to go 1 millisecond to 125 milliseconds, right? And now, if I draw a ramp on this parameter here, right, this is going to rhythmically phase the delay in and out of that sync. So it's going to start synced to 1/16th note, and then it's going to end synced to 8th notes, and then go back. So listen to the effect of it drifting in and out of sync with itself. And I'll pan these left and right a little bit just so you can hear it a bit better. And then you'll hear what that rhythmic phasing effect is all about. And then then I think I didn't like the beginning of that, so I'm going to have it start at 10 milliseconds instead. And then I'm going to have this one be at 115. Yeah, because the very bottom of the range is kind of all taken up by that. It's a curved range. I forgot that the range is curved on that delay. Right, now to come back. But yeah, that kind of an effect here, I'll get another ARP loop, but that kind of an effect is really, really cool. Here, I'll find it. Yeah, let's do this one. And then you can put it on repitch mode if you want it to be all crazy, or jump. Yeah, but yeah, that's a really good trick to do. It's just a basic Ableton delay, and it always works. It always sounds cool. So yeah, you just have it drift from one delay time to another. Okay, cool. Tend to refrain from the use of fat racks in my mixes as I feel they lack the contextual touch needed to really get something to gel with the song as a whole. However, I sometimes struggle to find the right touch on certain sounds when post-processing without them. Do you have any go-to order of operations when handling your post-processing of bass sounds? Yeah, I did a whole big long class about bass channel strips, Matt. Then I think it's probably outside of the scope of what we're going to do here. But I would say that when I want things to sound really like in your face, I'm always mindful of anything that interrupts that vertical wave edge that you need to make a transient or make a saw wave feel sharp and in your face. And as soon as you apply EQ or multiband processing, you knock those waves out of alignment, and the vertical height of that rising edge is now different because all of the phases of the different frequencies are no longer coherent. So that might be the thing that you are not liking. So check out my video, EQ is Ruining Your Shit. There's a video called EQ is Ruining Your Shit that has a visual demonstration of this. And you might try it and be like, oh, that's the sound I don't like. And if that's the sound you don't like, then skip the multiband processing and investigate things like M Wave Shaper, for example. M Wave Shaper is a free distortion plugin that allows you to draw your own transfer curves. I have a whole video on that too on YouTube. M Wave Shaper I use a lot in my processing, and you can get a great deal of control, and it's free. So check that out. And then usually when you're doing basses, you want to kind of saturate first to build up the highs a bit, and then take them off with some low pass, and then saturate that to get more highs, and then take the top off with low pass, etc. And it's usually going back and forth between several stages of saturation, low pass, saturation, low pass. And really, saturation and low pass are all you need for a lot of things. If you want more highs, you can either saturate to get more highs, or you can boost the Q or the resonance on the low pass and set it to the frequency you want to boost. Both of those strategies will give you more highs in different ways. And if you want less highs, you just turn the Q all the way down so there's no resonance on the low pass, and sweep it down. And between a nice saturation and a nice sounding low pass, you can usually get bass sounds where you need with just those two processes. Just don't try and do it all in one. Saturate, then low pass a little, then saturate a little, then low pass a little. And it's the kind of incremental buildup that makes it work. So there's not really like a hard and fast order of operations, because often the operation might be recursive. For example, saturating and low passing all over and over, right? So keep that in mind. And once again, don't worry about doing things right. Just worry about what works for you. Okay, Matt also asks, what are your tips for encoding width into sounds while keeping things present during mono playback? Is it really as simple as layering sounds with wider information or using filter delays, as I've seen other really well-regarded producers tend to gravitate towards? I really like how detuned basses sounds, but I find that increasing the unison and spreading things out in a wavetable synth patch just creates phasing issues that don't make the juice worth the squeeze. Yeah, that's very observant. Often you can get phasing issues when you're spreading using a unison, and a lot of people will have a separate sub that does not have unison. And if you make it so that your sub has no unison and then your tops have unison, that's a really good way to build up the sides. I do that a lot. And then I also will often, have multiple time offsets in the left and right. I'll use something like the Ableton align delay in parallel, and I'll offset the left and right like Haas effect layers, and slowly build up sound that way. Hang on, my dog is trying to get in. 1 second. Okay, come on in. In you go. All right, there you go, Feather. You can have your chair. There you go. What a good doggy. And then as far as making it work in mono, I often will, produce in mono for an hour or two, like just until your ears get used to it, and just go back and forth between working in mono for a stretch, working in stereo for a stretch, and it really helps you to kind of hear what you're doing in terms of the stereo image. And as a general rule, don't rely on stereo spread to make your mix work. Get the mix to work in mono and then add stereo for effect, and don't add it to every single sound. For basses and for vocals, I often like to have a saturated mono and then no saturation on the sides, just to make sure that that mono image is really powerful. And if you do a mid-side split and analyze a bunch of your favorite reference tracks, you'll have a much better idea of when to use how much stereo on the different sounds. And that's honestly a lot more important than which method you use for making that stereo, because most of the time when people have a problematic use of stereo in their music, it's because there's no structure to it. They're just pumping the width on everything, and then everything is like this crazy artificial impossible level of wide, and then they're like, well, why doesn't this work anymore? And it's just because physical sounds don't do that. So the mix doesn't have it doesn't feel like a real space anymore, because they've just blasted width on everything. So avoiding over application of width is far more important than which type of width that you do. Okay, so that's my main tip, is to go back and forth between working in mono, to use mid-side playthrough to reference various reference tracks that you admire, and rather than focusing on how the width is created, focus on applying it strategically and making sure that there's still a very clear hierarchy of presence, and that sounds in the back aren't getting in front of sounds in the front, because left and right and up and down, those are real dimensions in our 2D music world, but front and back is an illusion, and you must create that illusion by taking advantage of psychoacoustic phenomena. Like the highs, for example, highs die first in the natural world. The atmosphere breaks down the waves in those high frequencies and they fail to reach your ears, whereas low frequencies are harder to stop, and there's often more power in those lower frequencies. So you'll hear sub first as you approach a stage at a music festival, right? So highs die first, and just using the highs and the width to structure front and back, that's really the way. But especially like low pass and distortion, as I said before, those two tools used together can create front and back in your mix too, by carefully structuring the highs. Okay, so Daniel asks, I think something that would help a lot of people is to be able to recreate sounds or similar sounds rather from their favorite tracks. Learning to do this has helped me a ton. Yeah, I really recommend it. For example, being able to determine whether or not a sound is a sine wave, saw wave, etc., and being able to hear what kind of effects does the sound have on them. That is not a question, but it is a statement that I can support. It's cool that recreating sounds has helped you so much, Daniel. All right, Ego says, how do you reverse engineer sounds you've heard in the wild, like in other people's music or work, and reconstruct them in your DAW? Are your sound design sessions generally fully experimental, or do you tend to have some end goal in mind? Yeah, if I'm trying to recreate a sound, I'll normally like take a guess as to how it's made, then get in my DAW and try and do it. And if I'm right and it works out, great. But if I'm not right, then I'll download the track and A/B and try and recreate it exactly. And it's kind of it's really interesting doing that. You look at the pitch and you're like, okay, do I need to have more pitch modulation, less pitch modulation? Look at the harmonics, think like, okay, what's the balance of harmonics in the harmonic series? How could I achieve such a balance? And then the dynamics of the envelope and the width, and just by going through those things in sequence. But I usually go pitch, dynamics, harmonics, width in that order when I'm recreating them. But yeah, it really comes down to metering. You got to be able to see what you're doing. Okay, so this is from Will. Sometimes when making FM wubs, especially when using a feedback circuit, I get some very isolated sparkly highs in the 10 to 12 kilohertz range that I really like, but they can be aggressive in a mix. What are some good techniques to soften these kinds of highs? Also, more broadly, do you have a general philosophy about how to layer bass and stabs? What kinds of sounds do you look for? Okay, well, if you're trying to get rid of highs and you're not trying to make it sound like there's a filter, I encourage you to explore the 6-pole low pass filter. 6-pole high pass and 6-pole low pass are not something that you reach for when you're first learning about music. You're like, oh, this cuts the lows off hard. Okay, that's the high pass I want. This cuts the highs off hard. Okay, that's the one I want. But the phase rotation introduced by these EQ poles and stuff, it affects the phase relationship of the frequencies of everything above whatever the filter is. So, it's like which low pass you use makes a big difference. Which high pass you use makes a big difference. And whether you use high pass or like a shelf makes a big difference, So I recommend that whenever you're EQing, listen just as much as to the rest of the sound as the area around the cutoff that you're using, right? So when I started listening to the rest of the sound and not just like, does this high pass remove the bass? Does this low pass remove the highs? But I'm like, is the sound that's left changed in any way that I can notice? Once I started asking that question, I was able to really hear how much EQ was ruining my shit. And 6-pole is the gentlest slope. You cannot have resonance on a 6-pole filter. And if you low pass with a 6-pole, that's a really nice way to do it because the sounds that are above the pole are going to be a little bit rotated, but not that much. And the way they taper off is like kind of like the pink noise curve, basically. Like pink noise goes down 6 dB per octave, I think. But it's got like a nice gentle curve that when things are too bright, I find using a 6-pole low pass can really smooth it out without wrecking the rest of the sound and without wrecking the highs that are left over. So yeah, I'd say explore 6-pole low pass filter. Cody, I guess for me, it's a question of the relationship between all the elements in a song. How to get things to pop and sound clean and clear in all the frequency spectrums while playing at the same time. No interference or distortion and creating clean, crisp, harmonic sounds from the start, I'm sure aids in the mastering and finalization process. Maybe touch on subjects like ways to identify sound interference upon designing things and how to reduce or eliminate these problems for live performance quality music. Okay, cool. Yeah, we can talk about fidelity. So one thing that I would really encourage you to do is get some kind of visual metering because while visual meters are not a replacement for your hearing, the stuff that those visual meters will tell you is where to listen and what to listen for. And over time, when you have a relationship with your visualizer, you'll be able to learn lots of stuff that you can't hear yet. So those visual analyzers will train your ears, right? So analyzing other people's music using the arrangement exercise and using a visual analyzer and everything is an indispensable way to learn. And as much as I could tell you about the way I do things, studying the music that you love will teach you more relevant stuff. It might not teach you as much as quickly, but it's going to be tailored to exactly what you want to learn because that's exactly what you're studying, right? So the most valuable skill in your toolkit as a producer is learning how to reference and to use references to teach yourself and to expand your own musical sense, because 80% of getting better at music is learning to listen better and getting that analyzer and studying the actual tracks in question with an analyzer and analyze the stereo width, analyze the dynamics, analyze the harmonic series of each sound, etc., etc., etc. Isotope Insight is really good. I like the Flux Pure Spectrum Analyzer. That was the one I was using earlier. But when you really get in and start doing track recreations and stuff, you'll often notice that the best music, a lot of the sounds, the thing that makes the sounds in the front really pop is that there are sounds in the back that you would probably think of as bad if you were at Splice or whatever and you saw that sound on the shelf for like $2. You'd be like, this sound sucks. It's got no highs. It's all blurry. It sounds like it was recorded on a potato. Why would anyone use this piece of crap? Right? Is what you'd think when you're in the context of Splice. But if you get the stems from top-notch songs, like songs that win Grammys and stuff, if you look up remix contest stems, you can often find like stems for legit hit records. Or if you look up, I think there's this video game called Rock Band where they had all these big artists like like the Beatles and Bob Marley and stuff, and a bunch of stems from that are floating around. And if you get stems from these like huge artists, look, and you'll see that the thing that creates that illusion of front and back that makes the front so vivid is that there's these other sounds that are bad, that are quiet, that are blurry, that don't have highs, that don't have pain zone, that aren't very wide. Their pitch is shaky. They sound like bad. You wouldn't buy them, right? And this is one of the big lessons when you start to do your own sound design is realizing how these sorts of like kind of functional sounds that the listener isn't really supposed to notice are creating that sense of scale and perspective and dynamics that allows whatever the front sounds are to sound really up front. And then my last piece of advice for getting things to sound like how to get things to pop and sound clean and clear in all their frequency spectrums while playing at the same time. Your problem is the while playing at the same time part. You're assuming that the sounds are playing on top of each other. If you go in and do track recreations, you'll find that much of the best, loudest, cleanest mixes, one sound at a time. Because mixing is when you're putting two things together. It's always going to be a bit of a compromise. Where if there's only one sound at a time, you don't even really have to mix. You just have to let that one sound at a time be loud. Right? So a big part of mixing is composition and getting the sounds out of each other's way. All right, so John Hooves. My biggest hang-up is designing sounds correctly to a genre. A lot of my feedback in courses with my tracks has been specific to incorrectly choosing sounds based on the reference track or genre I'm trying to make. Would love to know great ways to learn how to sound design with a purpose for the track I'm trying to make. Okay, so I don't know if I'd use the word incorrect. I don't think anyone at the dojo would have used that word. I try to not use that word. Maybe inappropriate or would be better, or if you, perhaps you are not appreciating the history of the genres that you're trying to work in. If you use like genred sample packs, you should be pretty familiar with that genre before you use them, or else it's kind of like cultural appropriation, right? So I think that's probably more what that person is trying to say, is that it sounds like an outsider trying to make their version of genre X. And usually what happens when outsiders do that is that they will kind of like make almost like a caricature of the genre where it has all the like things that someone who's not familiar with the genre would notice. It's like let's say I'm like draw a Mexican person and you're like, okay, I got this, and you draw like Speedy Gonzalez with like a big sombrero and like a poncho, and he's like, it's taco night, and he's like playing like, it's like, yeah, that might be what someone who's like not a Mexican person thinks of when they're given the instructions to draw a Mexican person, but someone who's from Mexico might draw, one of their literary heroes. And a person who's not from Mexico wouldn't look at that and be like, that's a Mexican person, that author. They're gonna have a more nuanced take on what's going on inside the genre of Mexican people, right? So it's the same thing with your with going into a genre, especially if it's not a genre that you're passionate about being in, is you can be like that person who just puts a sombrero on someone when they're told to draw a Mexican person, right? You want to be like, oh, I'm gonna draw like Gabriel Garcia. Oh God, what's his last name? I can never say his last name right, but he's that actor dude. Or Frida Kahlo, draw Frida Kahlo, or like another famous Mexican artist, and not just a person with a sombrero on their head. Hopefully that metaphor made sense. Okay, what are your recommended VSTs or Ableton stock devices for designing bass sounds? My recommended VSTs are Ableton stock devices. I don't recommend VSTs really. They're cool, but VSTs and music equipment, it's like sex toys. Like, you can have perfectly good sex without sex toys, or you can spend all of your money on sex toys and geek out with people on the internet about them all day. Neither one is right or wrong, but you don't need sex toys to have great sex. You don't, right? So the way I like to design bass sounds is using Ableton's sampler, and I will use either high quality samples, preferably at a higher sample rate than normal, or I will record samples myself of like an oscillator, or sometimes I'll even just synthesize them. There's like a really cool website. If you just type in single cycle waveforms, there's a website where you can generate single cycle waveforms at any sample rate you want. And then I'll load either samples or samples of sound waves into the sampler. And then I start hitting shit with the sampler FM and stuff. And it just sounds like wild. Like, here, I'll give you a quick demo. So my number one instrument for bass is this thing, and it's literally just the Ableton sampler with a glue compressor after it. And this instrument is just a sine wave 808 that I made, and I made a velocity multi-sample. So as you go further down the velocities, you get more and more transient. So I made that multi-sample first, very simple basic sine wave patch, and then I went and resampled that multi-sample through all different kinds of hardware distortion. And you can see here the waves change as you go through the different flavors of distortion. And then I split it up so that they're all sensitive on the velocities, and I have a sample selector here so I can pick which one I want to use. So it sounds like... Oh, sorry, I was turning my push off and on. Oh, my push is having a brain fart today. But yeah, so and then when you hit so you can go through the sample selector here. Hang on, why is that doing that? Right, and then I can make it dive with this pitch envelope. Or I can add some FM to it with the FM oscillator in the Ableton sampler. So I normally make my bass like that. The envelopes in the sampler, the FM, the amplitude modulation, it's like the envelopes have more control than anything else in Ableton. And when you're FMing a sample that already has distortion in it, it just sounds awesome. Okay. This is from Peter Dookie Shoes. I've got some experience with Serum. How does Serum compare against Ableton for sound design? And are there some sounds it's better or easier to make in Serum than in Ableton? Yeah, Serum is amazing. Like, I don't really use it that much anymore, but there was a point where I was pretty heavy duty into Serum. It's got a 4x oversampling option in the global tab, by the way, so you can you can elevate the sample rate just inside of Serum. So try that when you're making samples. It's like kind of a more specific synth. It's more configurable. It has that 4x oversampling option, for example, that the Ableton synths lack. And the great thing about Serum is its ability to have a modulator like an LFO or an envelope affect not just synth parameters, like traditional synth parameters like wavetable or filter frequency or volume, but also have it affect effect parameters. And when you make wubs in Serum where the LFO is like moving the reverb and changing the threshold of the OTT and all this other stuff that's like really hard to do in Ableton unless you're using the Max for Live modulators, that's where I feel Serum really shines. So make sure that you like try out the one big modulator strategy or the one big mod strategy, and make a wub that wubs not just standard synth parameters, but also the effects parameters, because moving effects is wild. Okay, Andrew says 44.1 or 48 kilohertz. If you're making dance music and don't have a label, which one and why? Should you be rendering any sample that isn't at the settings so your CPU isn't spending time converting it? 32 or 24-bit. Why can't some CDJs play 32-bit tracks? If my sound card specs don't go higher than 24, does that affect its latency? If you're exporting lower than 32, is that when you should use dithering? And why does dithering sound like shit? When do you use it? Wow, it's a bunch of questions. All of those are answered in tons of detail in the class that I just taught in the Mastering Sound Design course. So if you want all the nitty gritty on those things, definitely check out that course. If you go to www.producerdojo.com/memberships, we have a special deal on right now where you can participate in the course as it goes live. We're about to do week 3 later today. And it's a pretty rad course, and we're learning all about sound design through the lens of Akira and using some of their awesome music and research to improve our sound design. And audio fidelity and specifically hypersound is a big part of it, which is why I started today's lesson talking about that. So it's a nice full circle moment. So 44.1 or 48 hertz as sample rates, those are output sample rates. I'll often work at 88.2 the whole time until I'm ready to do 44.1 for my export. But if you run into processor issues and you can only use the elevated sample rates sometimes, only use it when you're rendering samples that you plan on pitching down. Okay? Because the gains mixing wise, there are some gains. There's some leftovers in my null tests. I use null testing to assess the efficacy of elevated sample rates for mixing. There is some leftovers throughout the frequency spectrum. Like reverbs will process differently. EQs and saturations will process differently. Stereo images feel more open. Transients are better. Highs are a little more precise. But the gains are kind of not worth the trade-off of doubling all of your CPU for most people. If you work lean and mean and sample yourself often like me, I keep my processor like 5 to 20% when I'm working. I almost never cross 20% because I'm constantly printing down my audio after saving a version of it in my saved stuff folder inside the project in my Ableton browser. So I'm just constantly filling up the saved stuff folder with save points before flattening everything. So I'm basically using samplers to assemble all of my work, and I'll work on one sound at a time in super crazy resolution, then sample it down, save a version in case I need to load it up again, and then go forwards with the sample. And if you can work like that, then you can run at an elevated sample rate all the time and you have the CPU headroom. But if you're a normal person who like is constantly maxing their CPU and punching themselves in the face and hating their life because they didn't take my course, then yeah, probably 48 is fine, right? Um, now, 32-bit is not a sample rate. 32-bit is the bit depth that refers to amplitude resolution. So it's getting like a more precise picture of how loud the wave is at any point. So 32-bit or 24-bit will not affect your latency, right? That's a measure of bit depth. It's only sample rate that changes your latency because latency is measured in terms of samples. So if you're working at a higher sample rate, you actually have less latency. It's more CPU, but it cuts your latency in half every time you double the sample rate. So that is a kind of an advantage. It's nice, especially if you're someone who likes to play instruments. If you can keep your processor headroom low and then work at a low buffer size, you have half the latency actually. So that's pretty cool. And then output specs for commercial audio are 16-bit 44.1. So that's always what I render because I don't want to give them anything and have them have to convert it to wave and then convert it to MP3 again. So I hand it in 16-bit 44.1. And CDJs can also only play 16-bit 44.1 files. Some of the newer ones can play different bit depths and sample rates, but even the new ones don't like an elevated sample rate. They want 16-bit 44.1 most of the time. So render everything as 16-bit 44.1. Dithering is basically when you add a tiny bit of low-level noise to hide the noise that's introduced by bit rate reduction. So if you're rendering it 16-bit, you want to usually add a little bit of like triangular dithering or something so that your 16-bit waveform doesn't have that like that you get from bit crushing. But it's like adding low-level noise to hide bit crushing. So it's noise. The sound of dithering is literally noise, like so it doesn't really sound good, but it helps with downsampling to 16-bit. Okay, cool. So yeah, once again, the place to join the new sound design course is at www.producerdojo.com/membership. The course is not currently available as a standalone course, but if you get a membership at the dojo, which comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee, you can get the rest of 2024 for free, which is like 3 free months added to your membership. And in those 3 free months, you'll get my sound design course, which is normally $500 to participate in because you can submit assignments and I'll answer all your questions in Discord and all kinds of stuff. So it's not just like lectures. You actually get to participate in the course. And so that is normally $500, but you get that as a free bonus when you get a membership. And then if you get a membership, you'll have 30 days to get your money back. And no one really ever takes us up on that unless they have like a horrible car accident or something. But yeah, the annual memberships get you all 3 semesters of courses at the dojo each year. So you'd get 4 semesters for the price of 3. And you also get access to a ton of other cool stuff. So that's at www.producerdojo.com/membership. And this deal is only around for another week before things change. And that's not our special anymore. All right, cool. So I'm going to go over to the chat now. So if any of you have any questions that I missed in the chat, paste your question up again so it pops up to the top. And it's after 6, so I'm going to try and answer the questions quickly, but if any of you have like a burning question, paste it at the top so that it pops to the top of the chat, and then I'll go back. I haven't tried the Tasty Chips GR1 or GR Mega, but granular is really fun. Unless there's a particular sound to granular as the Tasty Chips does it, though, I don't know. I've never felt the need to not use a computer for granular. Okay. Oh, okay. Deja Visions is asking about the Flux Analyzer. There's a session version, which is under $100, and Essentials, which is like the full crazy package, that's $400. I would recommend getting the cheaper version. The budget version of Flux is great. Like the super fancy version is for if you're doing like surround sound film work or whatever. Okay. Do I have any advice for making binaural beats? Yes. Check out the Monroe Institute and the Gateway process. They got them to work really well and made people psychic with their binaural beats. So if they can do that, it's good enough for military psychics. It's good enough for you. But yeah, check out the Gateway process, aka Gateway Protocol, aka Project Stargate, and check out how they did them. But I find, like, if you're trying to entrain a brain to 7 hertz or 8 hertz, just use 16th notes. That's what that is, right? 16th notes at different BPMs. Like look up the theta wave that you want to achieve and just use 16th notes, because your brain will entrain to the 16th note rhythm. It's kind of a bit of a wild goose chase trying to make tones that are below the range of human hearing. Like, I get it if you're trying to make something that is inaudible that causes a psychoactive effect, but why not make something audible like music that causes a psychoactive effect? Then you can just use 16th notes if you're not trying to hide the fact that there's a sound happening. Um, okay, so okay, here we are. Is there any exercise you do for getting better at recognizing different waveforms, sine, saw, triangle, etc. in the wild? Yeah, use the oscilloscope, Melda oscilloscope, MOSCILLOSCOPE. That's in the free bundle at meldaproduction.com. Just look at sounds in an oscilloscope, and you'll see. Your eye will learn to recognize like FM versus additive, etc., etc., etc. There's nothing better than just using an oscilloscope. And then you just, like, over years of audio editing too, you'll just learn what the waves look like. Okay. And be it. I'm really interested in learning the workflow of a batch, creating a bunch of sounds on synths or audio recordings, and have a session where they get turned into finished presets and samplers. Oh, hell yeah. That is part of the course. That's like all of my sound design is like that. And DIY multi-samples is like huge. Like, people are sleeping on them because, like, all the Instagram ads are like, oh, you could never make your own multi-sample. That's only for experts with really fancy equipment. It's like bullshit. Normal people can make multi-samples. So yeah, that's exactly in the course. That's exactly in the course. And that's actually in a couple weeks. Derek Howard. So if you do use EQ in sound design, you just use Ableton and not ProQ. I've heard you saying you prefer ProQ sometimes. Yeah, I still use EQ in every song and in every project. I'm just less heavy-handed with it after learning exactly how it fucks up your sounds. And then ProQ, the linear phase max mode on ProQ is excellent on things like vocals, but most of the time when I'm working, I will just use all stock devices and work fast. And then if I later decide, I want my main lead element to be even better than the one that I made, I'm going to remake it from scratch using the best quality things that I can. Then that's when I'll go in and I'll use all linear phase EQ and all high quality mode for everything and blah, 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 blah. But I do a lot of track remakes as part of my mixing process. And I would encourage you to do that because, every digital process, you gain some things, but you also lose some things. And it's really easy to lose track of what you've lost and ruin your shit through over processing. Pazle, how would I go about trying to recreate the synth and melody from a track I like? Listen, just get the track, load it into your Ableton, look at it with every visualizer you can, play the piano on top of the track one note at a time to figure out what the notes are, and then enter that MIDI into a file using just the basic piano sound. Then replace the basic piano with whatever synth you think they used and try and recreate the sound. Okay. Blank says, I just think of your name as just swearing. Like, I think your name got censored or something. I'm like, all I can think of is swear words when your name is blank. Anyway, when do you think we will run out of all possible new music? Never. It's an infinite amount of creativity. There's an infinite amount of creativity. There are dimensions we don't know to measure yet, of sound dimensions and aesthetic dimensions we don't know to measure yet. So when someone uncovers or discovers those new dimensions of style, they're going to make music that makes everything before sound lame and dated. And that just happens again and again and again. And there's always more dimensions. And there might be a finite amount of territory within one given paradigm, but once the paradigm changes, there's infinite blue ocean potential again. Okay. Vance Swango. Hey, O Gates, do you have any tools and best approaches for isolating sounds and professional tracks for better recreation? Yes, Stemroller. Use the Stemroller AI. It's free and it's open source and it is amazing. All right, cool. Well, that's that for this AMA sound design session. Be sure to go to HTTPS, https://www.producerdojo.com/memberships, which is a long way of saying producerdojo.com/memberships, and get in there. Yeah, it's pretty rad. And if you haven't heard about my courses, here's a little bit about my course, The Producer's Path. Did you know that you could be proud of the music you're making 90 days from now, even if you've never made music before? All it takes is a commitment to 5 minutes a day. Yep, just 5 minutes, and you'll embark on a transformative journey into music production and self-discovery. Can you spare that? I'm Bill Gates, and I've spent 20 years distilling my experiences with Grammy-winning artists, making tracks played over 65 million times into something epic for you, The Producer's Path. This isn't just a course, it's a gateway to mastering music production without needing expensive gear or prior experience. You don't need to be born rich, you don't need to be born gifted. All you need is a commitment to spending 5 minutes a day on music. The Producer's Path is a proven system that has supported top artists throughout the industry. And now it's your turn to access these secrets and forge your own unique sound. As you journey through the 12 levels of the Producer's Path, each step designed to build your skills and confidence, you'll not only learn music production, but also discover how to express your individual style, breaking the rules like a true artist. Join our vibrant Producer Dojo community, get feedback on your tracks, and maybe even feature on a Dojo mixtape. With no subscriptions and free updates for life, your path to music mastery is evergreen, and you can come back again and again and again, getting more out of it each time. So what's it going to be? Continue as is, or spend the next 90 days at the dojo transforming into the music producer you've always wanted to be? Listen to what your fellow dojo members have achieved with the Producer's Path. Their success stories could be yours.
I started from zero.
Dude, the way you laid it out,
Here's what you do first.
It's amazing.
The habit tracking changed my whole mindset.
honestly,
Huge breakthrough.
Huge difference.
comprehensive.
Game changers.
It gives me goosebumps.
Just blows my mind.
That's when I was like, okay, I can make music.
I'm actually doing some art.
Making music felt more real at that point.
To understand, hey, I'm doing this shit right.
I can show my children's children who I was.
Other people have been saying it sounds good.
And everybody's, that's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting.
Never found the answer until I went to the Producer's Path.
Yeah, so that was The Producer's Path, which was a hit, and it still is. If you've never produced music before, that's the course. But if you want to learn sound design, I've been waiting to do this Akira-themed course forever. I love Akira so much. It's my favorite movie. Yamashiro Gumi make amazing music, and the course is rad. Check it out. All right, peace.